performance. It's something someone does. When we want to define translation studies, the first thing we may remark is that we have studies in the expression of translation studies. In French, for example, we have traductologie. We have traduction and we have traductologie. Déjà, avec logie, logos, it means that here we have the science of translation. In English, they convened or agreed on the title of translation studies. But what does it mean? It means that in this case, we don't translate. We study translation. So the activity is different. It's not like when we translate. If I'm given a translation, I have to translate it. I don't have to study it. I don't have to teach it. I just translate it. That's translation. It is what we may call a know-how. I know how to convert a message from a language into another one. It is a know-how. As for translation studies, it's many kinds of knowledge about translation, about oral translation, written translation, machine translation, about the history of translation. How do we teach translation? What methodologies, what programs we may have, or courses we should teach. And then there is another discipline in translation studies, which is concerned with we have at least six of them. Let's go directly to these disciplines, which make up what we call translation studies. Probably the first now is called criticism, but in criticism, we may include revision, correction, criticism, all sorts of, remarks, points of view about translation, how it should be done. That all of this, we call it criticism. History also is another discipline which started very early, along with criticism. But in history, we have two histories. We have the history of translation, and we have history of translation thought, or history of translation studies. There is also another discipline, which is teaching and training, teaching translation and training interpreters and translators to become professional translators and interpreters. Another discipline is just theorizing. And theories is in fact a result of criticism. People started by making remarks about if a translation is good or bad, or it is only partly bad or incorrect. But later, they started, talking about rules or things that should be done or not done, and they started theorizing. And it is the accumulation of all theories in the East, in the West, in the North, and maybe in the South. All these theories make up what we call today translation studies, or traductologie, علم الترجمة. Another branch or discipline is documentation. Documentation, in fact, is the work I've done in my book, أوضاع الترجمة في المغرب. What I did is that I gave statistics about alumni from Tangiers, for example, from 1989 till 2012. Now I have statistics up to, yes, excuse me, I'll just give a word about statistics of translated books in Morocco. As you can see, these statistics start from 1920 up to 2022. It is done by decades. As you can see, the first decade, there were only 4 books in a year. Maybe the greatest number of books that were translated in Morocco were between 2000 and 2009. I mean, but between 2010 and 2022, 921. All in all, we have about 1,900, more than 1,900 books translated in Morocco all along this period of 1920 to 2022. That's just part of the picture. And this is what I call documentation. The last, but there are others, I call them X and Y. I will talk about that later. The last one, the most recent, is concerned with machine translation. Since we started using computers and CAT, computer-assisted translations, with translation memories and applications like Trados and WordFast and Sistra and others. Now we're using other applications, with the help of AI, artificial intelligence. They are called ChatGPT, Reverso, DeepL, Google Translate, and others. So this discipline of translation technologies is a discipline apart. It's not history, it's not theories, it's not criticism, it's just translation technologies. In a symposium which I attended about a week ago, I met a professor from L'Université City from Paris, and she told me that some of the researchers today call that traductologie numérique, which means, in other words, translation technologies. There are some new nascent disciplines, but I can go back to them later. This gray circle with many gray little circles in different shades of gray, even theories, it looks blue, but it's a shade of gray. All of this is thinking about translation. It's not doing any translation, nor interpreting a speech. No, it's studying translation, analyzing translation, talking about translation, suggesting either theories or rules or giving statistics about books or about translators or about, for example, we can also talk about translation budget. How much does translation cost each year in Morocco? How much does it cost all over the world? Now we have statistical data about the translation budget, yearly translation budget. That's another subject altogether. But to begin with, people started from what I would call, what I colored with green. Let's just think about doing translation, performing translation. People started translating when they were faced with the need of translating. Two groups of people met some 200,000 years ago, maybe even earlier than that. We don't know. Probably nobody knows, because there was probably one language, and then people, traveled all over the world, and they had different languages. When they met, they felt the need to get to understand each other. The only way to do it was to translate. So some people from this group learned the language of the other group, and vice versa. That's how translation started. And it was oral for a long, long time. It's even, we can date it back to, it started way back in prehistory. Nobody knows how many thousands of years, but 5,300 years ago, when humans started writing, when they discovered that they could write and express what is oral into written form, at that time, approximately a little later, that's why we talk all the time about the Gilgamesh, translation of Gilgamesh in Mesopotamia, today's Iraq. That's where people started writing, about 5,003 or 200 years ago. At that time, a new way of translating started, a new form. It was the written form. So humans could keep interpreting orally and also translate in a written manner. And imagine, for more than 5,000 years, all humans could do is just interpret or translate in a written way. With World War II, some spying work started between those who participated in this World War II. And just later, that's why you can read elsewhere that machine translation started in 1953 or at the beginning of the 50s. In fact, some of it started even earlier. There are even those who write that the real beginning of machine translation dates back to the 20s of the 20th century, or the third decade of the 20th century. But in fact, machine translation started by the end of the 40s in the 20th century. So now we have three forms or three means of translation practice. And that's practice. So if you want to define practice, here it is. It's either oral, written, or machine. And in machine translation, we have so many branches also, as in written translation and as in oral. One day we will have a talk just about these if you move from practice into thinking and the writing about translation, we are in the переводоведение, as it is called in Russian, traductologie en français, علم ترجمة بالعربية, translation studies, sometimes even translatology in English, traductología in español, etc., etc., etc. For some time, for some decades, it was multidisciplinary. That is, the first people interested in translation were priests in churches. They translated sacred writings, some of the most ancient writings, and they were thinking about what is wrong with this translation, what is correct. And for a long time, it was the philological way of doing translation studies. It even lasted for centuries. And with that came the turn of studying literary translation. So poets and novelists and all those interested in literature, including critics, started talking about what's good in translation, what's bad, about faithfulness, about equivalence. So came the time when translation was studied by comparative literature. And then came the turn of linguists, thanks to de Saussure and his disciples, even in Soviet Union, who were, like Fyodorov and Barkhodarov and Komissarov. In Bulgaria, Anna Lilova. In Czechoslovakia, or in Germany, Pepke. So linguists started giving their opinions about what's equivalence, what's faithfulness, etc. But even semiologists were interested in translation. All sorts of people, historians, philosophers who wrote about translation. So for some time, for some decades, translation studies were multidisciplinary, and it remained as such up till maybe the 90s of the 20th century, with the cultural turn, when some new researchers started talking about the cultural aspects, like Susan Bassnett-McGuire and others, many others. And little by little, there are some who started saying that translation studies, la traductologie, n'est pas seulement une affaire de linguistes. Ce n'est pas une affaire de sémiologistes ou d'hommes de lettres. C'est une science à part. C'est une science que nous appelons traductologie. And little by little, when the SOFT, la Société Française de Traductologie, in France, they have many associations. One of the oldest is the SFT, Société Française de Traducteurs. This is an association which, like many others in Europe and elsewhere in Asia, in America, in Africa, in the Arab world, were trying to promote the profession of translation, trying to defend the rights of interpreters, I mean, professional interpreters and professional translators. But later, we have a European Association of Translation Studies. We have a French association, which is called la SOFT, Société Française de Traductologie. And they invited me back in April 2017 to participate in the first Congress they convened at the Université de Nanterre, and where they tackled the problem of declaring the autonomy